All right, guys, it is Wednesday. I'm back with you again for the World Builder series. I appreciate you guys giving me a little bit of time off so that I can focus on some studies. So this week, what we're talking about is culture and talking about the map again. Before that gets started up, I did want to make a couple of announcements. I'd mentioned before that I was going to be doing the one-shot series of Souls of Steel. That'll actually be coming up. The first one I've set up that it's going to be run through the Tabletop RPG one-shot group on Facebook. There is an interest post up there. Let me take a look, see if I can find it here. I want to say that I threw it up just yesterday. Yeah, it looks like actually I did it yesterday. And you'll find me under Chris Wilhelm, and there'll be a poster that kind of looks like one of those Russian collective posters, or rather communist war poster type things, for the Terran Collective, if you are interested in playing that game. It does look like I've got quite a few people that are interested in it right now, so I should be posting the event shortly. The second group, I'm going to go through the W3, and there has been some interest in possibly doing a European edition. So I may take a couple people from both groups, or whichever group happens to have the most interest, and put together a European game and set it at a time that would fit their schedules as well. Since I happen to go to school and I'm about to have about a month off, it's not a bad place for me to be able to kind of pick up and actually start running some games at kind of weird hours. So it works out for me. All right, the other thing that I did want to mention is Tim over at Tabletop Terrors has relaunched his channel, and his brother, whose name I'm totally forgetting right now. Let me pull him up as well. I feel bad now. Oh, James. James and Tim have relaunched their channel, Tabletop Terrors, and they're actually going to bring it back with some live plays for a game called the Copper Jackals. They now have a closed book on Facebook, but it is open to invitation. You can ask to join. But basically, it's the way they're presenting it, it kind of feels like one of those classic 80s action movies, but D&D, and I kind of like those style games, so I've already put in mine. If you take a look on there, there'll be somebody named Marcus North. That's my entry there. There's a bunch of entries inside there, and if you are looking to play kind of more of an action-adventure thing, the way it's going to be designed is it looks like there's going to be a roster. He's going to get everybody to do their first mission with the Jackals, and then if it continues to be popular and people are enjoying it, he may be continuing the games for a little bit longer. And there is word that they may be doing a co-DM type situation where both DMs are running the game. I'm not sure what their plan is to kind of dictate who controls what. That kind of varies from DM to DM. I've done a co-DM position before. It's not exactly my favorite because I feel like it is a little confusing for the players. I like when there's multiple DMs in the same realm, kind of like the living campaigns where there's multiple DMs that are playing in the same timeline and story kind of area. Unlike living campaigns where everybody plays the same adventures, it would be like two separate missions because it's supposed to be kind of a weird paramilitary D&D type game that maybe like both DMs would run separate missions, but like one's mission's failure could affect the other one. Right now, they're going to try this co-DM thing and see how it works out, which they may have better skill at it than I do, and that might be just my failings that I'm not very good at co-DMing. That's kind of my opinion on it. We'll see how it goes, and they haven't set a date for the first game yet, but once I find out, I'll go ahead and plug that on the channel here. I'm going to include a link for Tabletop Terrors in the description below once I'm all done. If anybody's catching this live right now, unfortunately, I don't have it inside my links right now, but their channel is Tabletop Terrors on YouTube here. Now, what I wanted to talk about first is when I put up the map, everybody informed me that at 4:30 in the morning, my brain evidently decided to go to Tolkien and not go back. So I named the map originally Isengard, which is one letter short of Isengard. And once I found out about that, we needed to change it. So I did some plugging around, and for me, coming up with a world name is actually the hardest. It's actually easier for me to come up with things like the city names, the different aspects of the culture, things like that. And so world names for whatever reason are very hard for me. So what I ended up doing was fooling around with Google, and I ended up using Icelandic for floodwaters, and then doing an anagram with the letters to come up with Stratmere. Now let's go ahead and pull up Stratmere real quick here. Now I decided that I was going to keep using Google because I think it's good for the map, for at least the world building stuff. Once we get outside of the map a little bit more, I'll probably go back to pre-recorded stuff. But if you guys are interested in me maintaining it as a Google recording, that way I can show you some of the features on the computer and things like that, let me know in the comment section. So if you guys haven't been keeping up with the blog, this is kind of a quick rundown of what's been going on. This is the world during the flood season, but I added some neat stuff to it. So let's go ahead and turn it on the dry season. Okay. Here we go. And so if you take a look at it, I've got the flood season and the dry season here. There's a bunch of different little cities and stuff like that. What I basically did is I first went around and did those trade cities and important posts that we were talking about before about why things would be placed there, for economic reasons. And then I started looking at areas where normal people would settle. And that's where I kind of got into, computer wants to be a little slow about this one. Here we go. That's where I kind of got into this area right here, which I'm, for lack of a better term right now, just calling it like the Riverlands, because this area would be very fertile. So there's lots of little towns around here and then a big castle. And this is what I decided is to give myself a little key here. And I went ahead and built that up. And then the other thing I did here, which is a little bit different than what I've done in the past, is, let me zoom in on this key here. I left kind of a signet mark on the map here, that crested eagle. And then I've also got this Elgrod 198. The year may change, but I decided I wanted to have a important cartographer in the world, Elgrad, who's recognized for his accuracy. And so that would be another kind of a neat feature to the world, that the players may have a chance to meet Elgrad, or they could specifically ask for his maps, or maybe I'll start them with a map that's not Elgrad's actual map, and there may be some variants in there, or possibly even just errors. And so that could be something that we could explore, is looking at different cartographers and their different styles, because Algrad may have the better tools and things like that, or more experience, or traveled more, but there are other cartographers out there selling other maps that may have like a certain amount of error due to their tools, experience, or where they traveled. I mean, some real world cartographers didn't even go to a lot of the places that are on there. They just kind of referenced other maps and pieced together what they could. My idea is that Elgrod would be probably like a traveler himself, and has mapped it out personally, just to kind of have like a different NPC in there. The other thing about the key is I went ahead and put inside here like small town, large town, the keeps, and then these are the two important ones right here. I decided to make some capitals and some walled cities. The reason for this is because in a normal D&D setting, walled cities are really important for a region, and so I decided to go ahead and do that. And that's where, like, if you guys remember, the trade town came into place, and a couple of these other locations here. I decided to change this one over to a capital city. And what really made me kind of get into this idea of doing capital cities was thinking about where these countries would break off from each other. So what I did is I created this color layer right here that you guys can see. And once I turn that on, you'll see my different countries. So this is actually my favorite way to display the map right now. For anybody looking to do this sort of thing, what I did is I created my own color, like a color layer, and I dropped that right behind the dry season and the flood season, which in a normal game that would just be your regular map. And then I set it to hue because I really liked the way that it turned out right here. If you guys remember, I was kind of strongly encouraging you guys to go with multiply. This is what it looks like on multiply. I just didn't really care for the color scheme that much, and so I played with the different layer styles, and I decided that hue looked the best. I just really like clicked with it. And so if you notice, I've got like one color here to designate this upper land, and then I've got another one here. This is its own country. This is a country, and then this middle country right here, and then I've got this northern one on this side. And I may change this little bit right here. I don't know. I kind of like it right now that is part of the northern country, but it does also have some value in thinking maybe it is part of this middle country here. If you guys have any opinions or suggestions on that, let me know. Some other stuff that I did is I talked about the value of these compass roses and these little compass pieces here. The other thing, like I mentioned, I did this legend over here. I also put Stratmer on a banner of its own and then put some embellishes on the corners here. I don't know if I'm going to stick with those embellishes right now. They're okay. I'm not completely sold on them. My idea is that eventually I'd like to be able to do something a little bit different with what the map looks like. Let me show you real quick here. So I did a perspective just as kind of a mock-up of how I was looking at the map. I like the way that this is done. I think this is kind of a neat idea, and I kind of want to explore this a little bit, but I'd rather go with something a little bit more like, let me pull up a picture here. I found a really good one earlier today, and I'm just trying to remember where I ended up hiding it. Here we go. I really like this map here, which let's zoom in a little. It gets a little blurry, so kind of stick with me here. This is basically a Russian map, and if you notice, there are these little pinpoints that go up to these playing cards, and I think kind of the point of this game is to like show you where certain NPCs are from. But I really like this idea, and this is kind of what I was originally thinking about with the map having that perspective angle on the table, that I was going to have some stuff that comes up and maybe like a picture of like the city, and like instead of having an NPC here, I have a nice picture that kind of personifies what that city is about right here. Or maybe I have another one over here that shows like an important woodland area. And then what I can do is actually, when it comes time to play, change out some of those little iconic images there for ones that are pertinent to the players for that game session. And I thought that was kind of a neat way to do it. And we'll kind of talk about session prep once we get done with the world prep stuff. But I think giving players like a little preview at the beginning of the game does have a strong way of keeping your players engaged with the game as it develops. So let's go ahead and close out of this, and we'll go back into the map here. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of what's been going on with the map. The only problem with this color layer, which isn't really a problem because I can correct it, is if I turn off the dry season right now and I just go to flood season, you kind of see all the land underneath. But to me, for this project, I think that's okay, because what happens is when the flood season comes around, this section of water right here is more shallow than like this section of water out here. So it is kind of interesting to have that color scheme there still. The only thing that kind of falls off is if you look at the waterways, they're still blank on there. I did that on purpose so that it looked nicer when the dry season was showing. This would basically be more for my reference. This wouldn't be one that I hand out to players, because I think that if I was going to give one to players with the color coding correctly like this, I'd have to clean it up a little, because this just doesn't look right to me. But it's definitely worth noting there. So let me go ahead and actually turn back on the dry season. All right, so this week what I wanted to kind of talk about was cultures and what they mean inside the world. So we started to do a brainstorming session, and there's a common thread that happens in a lot of games where cultures are decided by, let me go ahead and pull this back up here. Cultures are actually decided by racial aspects, which I think is a little strange, because there is some value in saying that in a world of fantasy, that a dwarf's culture would be more relatable to another dwarf, and it should be distinctly different than a human's. But a lot of times what they leave out is stuff like dwarves from one region of the planet shouldn't necessarily have the exact same culture as dwarves on the other region of the planet. Some of your longer lived races are probably going to be a little bit more traditional and probably stick to at least one major theme of culture. However, that doesn't mean that it's going to be entirely true at all times. Most games do a good job of showing sub-races having cultural differences. If you look at the elves, the drow are distinctly different than the standard elves. Your high elves are distinctly different than your standard and drow. And then you have your wood elves, which are all really different. And then if you want to really mess with that some more, you can take a look at Eladrin and see how they stack up, because they're sort of elves. Um, a little bit more Fey touch than the traditional elf is, but it's still kind of in that same Blake like genus, if you will. Um, but the reason I bring this up is because humans in a lot of games, they do a great job of showing that there are strong cultural differences, and that may be due to the shorter lifespan that humans live. Um, Inside this world, the only species that I've really decided that I really want to keep is this hag race, which is going to be a template upon other races. And I think being a hag should have its own culture, um, which I'm thinking has to do with like the curse that they live through themselves. Halflings, since they're a fairly new race, there's probably just going to be a halfling culture, but humans are going to be kind of spread out. That's the third one that I've kind of solidified my choice on. They're going to be more spread out, and because of that, they should have more chances to be culturally different and divergent. This is where like accents come in to show kind of cultural differences, customs, holidays, things like that. Um, and these are all kind of things that you want to think about to kind of distinguish your cultures. Uh, a lot of players or a lot of GMs, if you're inexperienced in world creation, I'm kind of starting with the really big picture stuff. We're going to start narrowing in that focus a little bit more. I like to establish what my world looks like and some baselines of the world, and then I zoom in on a region. So we're going to be making that transition fairly soon. Once we decide to make that transition, we're going to start to see how cultures specific to that region are done. Because right now, my intent with this video is to kind of get you thinking about how exactly you want to divide your cultures. You don't necessarily have to have everything solid just yet. A good rule of thumb with humans is, you know, if you want to save yourself some headache, make them vaguely close to real world culture, because it's easier for a player to grasp on the idea of you saying, well, they're kind of like Vikings. They're a noble culture. They go out and they raid, but they're also farmers, and the reason that they raid is because they have harsh winters where they're from, and you know, if food supplies don't last long enough, they have to get it somewhere else. So my player has kind of a general idea of what this culture is because I've related it to a culture that they understand. You can also do this to cultures that are solidified in fiction that are identifiable with that player. So like the Horse Lords from Lord of the Rings. Say you want to tell your players that basically you're going to have a horse lord like culture, and they should know that basically, you know, horsemen are important. There should be some sort of vaguely knight-like order that's kind of in charge. That the land is probably spread out. It's very easy to live there, but at the same time, it does make them kind of a target of other people's attentions. Um, I just realized I labeled this thing part 4. This one should be part 5, and I'll be fixing that inside the notes afterward. Um, but yeah, so the relatable scale sometimes works easier for everybody. So don't feel that you need to create 100% brand new content for everything. Um, a lot of what I'm doing inside this series is kind of exploring topics that I don't necessarily use in all of my games either. Like maybe I don't create a specific culture that is more or less custom to that world. Instead, I go, okay, these ones are like the Vikings, these ones are like the Mongols, these ones are like the Greeks, go. And that sometimes works, especially if you're trying to condense this down into a shorter scale. Um, I believe in video 1, I talked about it. Not everything needs to be used, but these videos are to kind of like stir your imagination, get you thinking about what kind of options are out there for you as far as what you can bring to your table and kind of enhance your own style as far as world creation is concerned and setting up your games. Now, with these cultures, the other thing that I want to stress is kind of like I said with the maps, don't build it alone, or don't go at it alone, I think was the phrase I used. Um, if you have a player who's really interested in a specific culture, which a lot of players tend to be influenced or specifically interested in like Asian cultures, Vikings. You may see some Greek stuff, but that's not as entirely common. Occasionally, you'll see stuff like Arabian Nights, kind of like iconic, um, like Arabian fairy tale type interest in culture. If you see stuff like that, check with your player because your player will probably have some input and be able to be more than willing to put forward some information to help you kind of mold their culture that they want their character from to a specific way that they would like. Like in one game, I had a player that wanted to make basically an Egyptian-like race that was huge into slavery and was capturing everybody around the lands, and they were more or less like the evil culture of the world because of their slavery and their belief system. And they basically blamed everything they did on the pharaoh. It was the pharaoh's will, um, to kind of justify their actions. And so with that little bit of information, I know what to build for him, and so that he can get the culture that he's looking for. And so if you do have a player who's interested and expresses that something would be interesting to explore, go ahead and work it in. The worst that it'll do is you'll spend like 5 minutes talking to a player about what kind of culture, write down a couple notes. You'll get it basically the way he wants it, and then you can add your own like seasoning to the mix there. So in the case of like the vaguely Egyptian culture, um, instead of having them be more like enslavement within their own cultural society, and I'm talking about like Egyptian pharaohs, not Egyptian current. So like instead of like breaking it down into like a class structure, what they did is they would go to other countries and they enslaved all races that were shorter than humans because they believed that they were subhumans, to actually use like a definitive term. And so they're originally they enslaved halflings because they were a weird um, amalgamation or curse of man is how they looked at it. And they didn't actually look at halflings as their own race. And so the halflings made poor slaves because they weren't very strong, they weren't very durable or anything. And so eventually they moved on to dwarves, and that became their slave race of choice, was dwarves. So having stuff like that will kind of change the world and give you a different aspect. Another example of a game that was kind of popular, I did a vaguely World War II inspired game of Dungeons and Dragons third edition through Pathfinder, which was called the Elf Slayer Wars. Essentially, it you had a human race that believed in human supremacy and believed that elves were holding them down. In the world, the elves were inclined to control magic, and so instead of using the World War II argument that they control the banks and the government, the humans were saying that they control history and magic, and because of that, because they know so much about history, because they lived through it and it was their own lifespan, that they can modify it. And they're basically saying that the elves are twisting historical facts to benefit their own race. Some of it was kind of true, especially about the hoarding of magic. The elves actually did that in the world. But it led to kind of this human supremacy type thing where they would go out and they would push the elves from their lands and try and get rid of them completely. And so once I set the stage for that culture, I allow my players and I said, okay, what do you guys want to play? And I've had players play both with the rebellion on the elves side and push back borders, and I've had people play with the human side and instead hunt down elves. And the hunting down elves has honestly been the more popular one. I think it just might be because people are tired of seeing elves. But it's definitely one of those things that once you set a culture, I wouldn't necessarily, like in this case, I wouldn't necessarily dictate to my players that you have to be from this culture or anything like that, um, unless it's a culture you guys build together. If it's a culture you build together, you will probably get more reception from your players to play that specific culture. So let's say I go to the table and I say, I would like to have a very honor-driven society. And then I look at my friend Jeremy. Jeremy says, well, I like honor-driven, but I want to have a little bit of music influence or some sort of arts and culture. So right now we've got this idea of like an honor-driven society that values arts and culture. And then we go over to our friend Murdoch, who goes, okay, if we're going to already have honor, arts, and culture, let's go ahead and add like higher learning to the mix. And then we go to our friend Nate. Nate goes, okay, we've got this. You know what? I want to make this kind of interesting. I'd like the society to be a meritocracy. We've got this idea of basically it's a learned city or learned culture rather that focuses on arts, values an honorable person that tells the truth and things like that, and studies magic. So we're going to basically make it to where whoever is the strongest or the most potent caster should be the leader of the place. Um, so now we've got this idea of what the culture is all about, and we can start working out NPCs and things like that. And the best part about building a culture as a group is that when the players go and they do that, they build out these NPCs and things like that. It's now players are more apt to say, "Oh, let's go talk to Senator Upstein." Because they named Senator Upstein. It's not, let's go talk to the senator or mayor, or whoever that guy was. Another thing that is very helpful when building these cultures is if you're going to do it on the global scale, like I'm looking at, maybe look at tags essentially. Like I can look at that map and I can go, okay, I'm thinking I want to start my players in that Riverlands area, just because it's an area that would be less of adventure going on there, or maybe the one that is on the northwest. That first trade city that I put down, if you guys remember that part. So I'm going to pick one of those, but I want to kind of develop what I think their culture should be like. The Riverlands country, I liked the aspect of them having that largest trade city during the dry season, and then during the flood season, their people separate. So I'm thinking that there should be like almost like a competitive nature between the three walled cities, one of them being the capital, of course. And so I'm thinking that maybe it should be kind of a peaceful, traditional kind of a D&D feel where you're going through the countryside, you're helping villagers and all that stuff. But within the cities, there's a lot more political intrigue. And then if I go look at the northwest continent here, they've got that major capital, and then they've got a couple walled cities as well. And maybe I want that one to be a little bit more unified. And they've got less smaller towns, so the idea of like big cities and structured government and things like that may be more beneficial to that culture because they do have a little bit harsher environment over there, or whatever the case may be. And so I can kind of look at those things and pitch those out to my players as far as what they're interested in. Usually when I look at a campaign pitch, we'll go a little bit more into this. What I've done in the past is I've pitched one idea. What I recently did in L5R or Legend of the Five Rings is I pitched one idea but multiple play styles, and that seemed to have a lot of reception. So like there's a play style that's involving investigation. There's another play style that involves hunting evil demons and things like that. There's another play style that involves the political intrigue side of things. And so what I do is what I'm thinking about now in the future is doing the same thing, essentially picking a region, coming up with a story, and then giving them my hook idea for my regular campaign, my hook idea as, okay, do you guys want to play an adventure game? If so, this is what the start will look like. If you want to play a political game, this is what the start will look like. If you want to play an intrigue game, this is what the start will look like. And it won't necessarily be 100% defined, because let's say they want to do heavy combat, but they also want intrigue. They want something kind of like a Game of Thrones feel, which is kind of the best way to describe that, intrigue with lots of like heavier combats and things like that. It leans a little bit more towards the intrigue side, but you get the point. So, I mean, let's say, you're going for that sort of a feel. Well, your players can let you know right away. And the best part is I only wrote one adventure, basically. Or at least I outlined one adventure, I should say. I haven't written anything definitively just yet. I've named a couple NPCs, and I've explained from which point of view, what those NPCs mean from each point of view. So, like I've got a town governor or rather a province governor, who may or may not be possessed by a demon. And they have to find out why or who he was. And if they decided not to go the demon hunting route, there happens to be an NPC group that is also there to investigate the Providence mayor. So basically I have it covered to where if they do decide to be the people that are investigating, they would come in as a separate team from a different investigation team that would be there for a whole different reason. That investigation team would have been coming from the Emperor directly, whereas they would have been marching on behalf of like one of the Emperor's chosen, um, and just happen to arrive at the same time without knowing that each other was there. So then there would be like a dichotomy between those two groups. Um, but that's kind of how that one's going to go. For this world, if I decided to do those Riverlands with the political intrigue, that's basically how I would set it up. Is, do you guys want to do, casual monster hunting, help the people kind of game, or do you want to do political game? And how I would write it is I would write it to where there is political, there is monster hunting, and there is like intrigue, trade, things like that. I've already mentioned that trade's going to be important in the world, so I may ask them if they want to do a maritime game where they play on ships and things like that mainly, or swashbuckling adventures, which I like that stuff a lot, so it doesn't bother me any if that's the choice. So, whatever one they pick, I make sure and write a little bit of all of it going on, at least inside this first adventure, so that I can give them a taste of, okay, we want to be swashbucklers and maybe a little bit of monster hunting, but even though we're doing that, there's still some political stuff that's going on in the world. It'll make your world feel more involved and evolved, rather, by having these little aspects addressed in the world. And it's totally easy to do this. Let me pull up one more thing real quick here. So this is a trick I learned from Dungeon World. Let me guys show you this handy dandy tool here, and you're going to be super impressed, I promise. All right, let's show this. All right, you guys see this right here. This is a little pie chart. I told you were going to be really impressed by this one. So what this is in Dungeon World, they have what's called a threat, or rather a danger, and then you write out what the threats are. And as the game progresses, you fill in this little pie chart. And the heroes can take actions which will reduce this little pie chart here. But the villains are always going to try and push their own schemes. And so what I've gotten in the habit of doing is putting down these little pie charts, which range from 4 to 8 sections. If you want to do 6, you just do 2 big sections and then 2 small ones right here and here. So 4 small sections in total. But let me do this real quick here. But essentially, all I do is I write down what their goal is. And let's say this bad guy's goal is to summon a demon, and he's going to figure out a way to summon that demon no matter what. So the first adventure that they do is to go find something to stop that demon summoning from happening, and that will maybe stop the clock from progressing. But then the demon or the man who's summoning the demon may find another way, and he'll get that clock moving forward anyways. So it keeps you focused on things. But bringing this back to the cultural aspect of what's going on in your world, you can set up those clocks for things like peace treaties, wars, monsters attacking villages. If your players don't do anything to stop it, progress your clocks. And it's a very easy way to track it, is to have those little clocks written down. So that is definitely something that you guys can use. Let's take a look here. What else did I want to discuss? Oh, culture is defined by religion. So that's a big thing in human culture, at least in the real world, is that the cultures are kind of defined by their religion, or at least the religion sets the parameters of the culture. If you happen to be atheist, I'm sure you can at least acknowledge the fact of seeing that culture and religion almost go hand in hand, or at least influence each other back and forth. A lot of the times, religion kind of dictates culture needs. If you look at the world today, you see a lot of culture defining religious needs now, and that may be the case inside your world. Is decide how you want that to be. Do you want it to be like the Dark Ages, where religion dictated culture, or do you want it to be more like Enlightenment eras, where culture kind of defines religion? Especially sets forward parameters on what is considered acceptable behavior in society when you start looking at those things. And with that, you can kind of decide, okay, let's say that religion is going to be important. Is there going to be a defining religion for this region, or this specific? Usually a culture can be defined in a grand scale as the country's culture. and then you can start looking at regions and then deciding special things about each region. But for a game world, it's easiest just to think about the country's culture as being different than necessarily the global culture. There should be some level of coherent global culture, unless you want to have a country that just feels foreign to the rest. For example, in a medieval D&D game, having an Oriental character should feel foreign. Their culture is very different than what a medieval culture represents. And if you want to go for that sort of thing, you definitely can. I encourage it because it does make the world, again, feel more evolved. So with that, like I said, I would divide it up into countries and then set up each country a little bit different. In the case of my world map, my eastern countries will probably be similar, at least to the grand scheme of things. I'll probably pick out 2 or 3 characteristics of what those countries are about, and then I'll give them more about, sorry, not what those countries are about, but that hemisphere is all about. Excuse me. And then I'll define 2 to 3 characteristics for what the Western Hemisphere is all about, and then I'll break it up by countries. Because my world is more into trade, I'm going to say that I'm probably going to lean more towards enlightenment rather than religion. If you go down the religion path, you also want to kind of make a decision on how tactical your world is, or how militaristic your world is, I guess would be a better term. A lot of times when it comes to religion or strong beliefs, it can spur on hostile behavior because you believe that your specific religion is correct. This carries over into the gaming world as well, that specific religions will believe that their path is correct, and quite possibly even the only correct path. Even if the world is polytheistic, they may believe that one god or a certain section of the gods is the best way to go, and you can play that up inside your game. For politeness, I would recommend refraining from real world religions that are practiced and followed, at least by your players, because you may touch into kind of sore subjects. Now, if you want to create a religion that is monotheistic and believes in like one divine being that happens to be kind of godlike, and they're relatively Catholic, and you want to tell your players, hey, I've got this religion that I'm thinking about that's basically going to be Catholic. Are you guys okay with it? That's kind of the best way to approach it if you're going to have a religion that is very close to a real world religion that's practiced by any of your players, or at least understood by any of your players. I would just check with them, and that falls under what's called the social contract, which is, basically understanding where your players are coming from, what their triggers are, what things they'd like to see in the game, what things they don't want to see in the game. So if I present that game idea to a friend of mine, he happens to be a religious guy, and he doesn't have a problem with it so long as we acknowledge that it is not supposed to be Christianity. It may be a fallacy that is kind of based upon Christianity, but so long as it is not verbatim Christianity, he doesn't really have a problem with it. And I know that he appreciates us bringing up that conversation, saying, hey, so I've got this idea. What do you think? And he lets me know, as a person who practices that religion, what he's okay with, what he's not okay with, how he thinks maybe I should change it a little bit so that it makes more sense in the world and isn't offensive. That may be the more politically correct way to do things, but I find that it does stave off any sort of arguments that may develop as the game progresses. If you're doing a one-shot, you can kind of get away with using real-world religions, even in a fallacy kind of way, a little bit easier. Simply because when you present a one-shot, it's presented differently than a campaign is. People may be okay with you poking jabs at like Catholicism or Judaism or anything else for that matter inside your game for one episode, but they may not be okay with that for an extended period. Again, check with your players to make sure that they're comfortable with the subject matter you wish to present, and that goes for everything, not just religious stuff. If you include real world political things in your game, like let's say you guys remember Occupy Wall Street. I had a game where there was a city that had zombies that were basically taking all the poorer jobs. They were doing stuff like street cleaning, the sewage maintenance, trash upkeep, and so a lot of the people in the city that used to do those jobs are now out of jobs, and there's this whole one percenter type relationship. Um, Before doing that game, I kind of brought it up to my friends and I said, hey, I kind of want to throw this in my game and explore it. And so long as everybody's okay with it, it doesn't really change things as far as like how you guys play. So if you decide to explore any sort of real world topics, I do recommend bringing it up with your group, because your political opinions may offend others and that may lead to you not having friends anymore. That's kind of the gist of this one. But the whole thing kind of revolves back to I don't know if I would necessarily want to make racial cultures as much as regional cultures. Um, I've decided on a fact for the world as far as a world culture thing. Given that there's so much trade in the world, I want honor to be an important thing about the world. If you look at stuff like swashbuckling movies and books and things like that, you either have people who are very honorable or they're very scrupulous or dishonorable. Infamous, I believe, is the 5th edition term. So what I'm thinking that I'd like to do, I mentioned it in another video for a Saturday response, is remove charisma, replace it with honor, and then whatever your honor modifier is, that can be used on charisma skills. So honestly, my characters could just use a regular D&D sheet where it says charisma, just one line that and write the word honor, and then we just play it like the honor stat. But it rolls for everything that charisma does. That was one thing that I kind of wanted to include in the world. After talking about it in the video, I decided that that was kind of a neat cultural feature that I decided to put across the whole world. So some of the stuff that I'm looking at is like honor as a world culture, trade as a world culture. I haven't decided on hospitality since trade is so important. If you look at cultures that are a little bit more driven by capitalism, hospitality is not usually on their list of big important items. I think it might be interesting to explore a capitalist society that's also interested in hospitality, but it's almost counterintuitive. So I'm going to put that on a back burner. Maybe I'll make one country interested in hospitality, but the other one's not so much. Just so I can explore that, but I don't think it should necessarily be a global scale thing. And I'm thinking the other thing for the world culture should be ambition. I want to have the world feel kind of like a swashbuckling world, if you will. So the idea of honor being there, the trade being there, and then ambition being there will really kind of reinforce that theme that I'm thinking in my head. So with that, I now have an idea of how basically the world functions. And then I can, like I said, narrow it down to countries, and maybe I'm going to have one that's going to add 2 or 3 bullet points. The way that I usually do it is I break it, like I said, for this world, there's kind of 2 distinct hemispheres, the Eastern and Western hemispheres. I'll probably take a look at what I think should be valued in each one of them. For my Eastern hemisphere, because it's got all those farming cultures, I'm thinking that one of the core values or aspects to that culture should be family. I think that they should be a little bit more family driven. In fact, that middle country, I think, would be a good place to have hospitality because they've got so much physical wealth from having so much food and things like that. They may not have as much like iron and things like that, but that country is going to be mainly peaceful. They do kind of have the problem being in between 2 countries, and so they will have some forces and things like that. But for the most part, that land should be, I'm thinking, a little bit more peaceful and have the wealth to be able to be more hospitable to visitors. And since ambition is kind of in that list, I think that in cultures that have honor and ambition at the same time, you start to see more stuff like a visitor comes, you break out the good food for them. You use the good plates and things like that because you want to leave a good impression of your family and your household and bring honor to them. And so I think that kind of goes hand in hand with that idea. Now for that middle country, I do have that one trade city that splits in half. That city I'm probably going to give a little bit different culture. It's going to probably be a little bit more focused towards greed and ambition, um, going kind of more of a darker side rather than like a positive thing for ambition. Um, just because the way that the city is divided, there's the lower class and the upper class, and there's not really a space in between. And in fact, they actually split for half the year, and then they come back together in that one city. Um, because of that, I think that might be kind of an interesting city to play. In fact, that might be a good city for some city adventures or urban adventures, whatever you'd like to call them. I'm a little weak in that category, as I've discussed in the past, and I'd like to try some of that stuff just to kind of get a little bit more practice under my belt as far as doing some game styles that I'm not used to. So yeah, I mean, you break it up, and I would start with like 2 or 3 aspects of the big scale, and then I'd kind of zoom in a little, and then zoom in a little more, and then zoom in a little more. Don't necessarily outline everything right now. Like I said, as we get to the point that I'm solidified with how I like that the world works, we're going to move into selecting a region and defining that region. Once we start defining the region, that's when we're really going to work out cultures. This, again, is kind of one of those brainstorming videos. I think during the process of making the map, about half of your work is actually brainstorming. So doing that together is probably one of the better ways to go about getting yourself set up, is to just look at those different cultures, the races and things like that that you want to bring into your world, and have kind of a big picture of it. I'm thinking that next week we're probably going to talk a little bit more about races. I'm probably going to make some more definitive decisions. I've left it open and I haven't received a whole lot of responses, so I'm probably just going to move forward. Now, if you guys have any ideas or inspiration for me on culture, any of these topics I leave open for any sort of input that you guys may have. Let me know, and we can explore that a little further. Go ahead and post it inside the comments to this video, or if you happen to see my video posted in one of the groups, let me know on there. For anybody who is aware, I am in the Houston area. I did not get caught up in the flooding, if you were curious. So thanks for that if you were paying attention. And as far as that goes, that's pretty much all I've got for tonight. Once I get the date decided on Souls of Steel, it'll actually be aired on the channel as my first live game that I'm going to put up. We may see some more live games on my channel. It just kind of depends on my content and schedules, or schedule for content, I should say. As it stands right now, I run 1 game a week, and I may talk to those guys about possibly doing a live game, and it will be up to them if they want to have their game shown. That would be a Legend of the Five Rings campaign. If they decide that they do not want to have their game shown, what I may end up doing is doing some campaign recap sessions where I just kind of talk about what happened during that session for 30 minutes to an hour after that session's over in like a Google Hangout or something like that. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys at the gaming table.